The hand was on my wife's shoulder for exactly 3 seconds. The 15th of June, 1959, 8:47 p.m. at the Audubon Ballroom. James Parker, Grand Wizard of the Manhattan KKK chapter, had just made the worst mistake of his life. When May turned around and I saw the fear in her eyes, when I saw that white hood smile at what he'd just done, 200 people in that ballroom froze. Because they knew what came next. They knew that touching Mayme Johnson wasn't just disrespect. It was a death sentence. I am Ellsworth Johnson, but Harlem calls me Bumpy. And the night a Klan leader put his hands on my queen, I taught 200 witnesses why some lines should never be crossed. The Audubon Ballroom was hosting a fundraiser for the Harlem Education Fund. May had organized the whole event, bringing together politicians, businessmen, entertainers, everyone who believed black children deserved the same opportunities as white children. She'd been working on it for months, turning what should have been a simple charity dinner into the social event of the year. May wasn't just my wife. She was Harlem royalty in her own right, a woman who'd built schools with her bare hands and her sharp mind. When Mayme Johnson spoke about education, senators listened. When she organized fundraisers, millionaires opened their wallets. When she walked into a room, conversations stopped not from fear, but from respect. That is why James Parker had come to the ballroom that night. Not to donate money or support education, he'd come to send a message that even in 1959, even in Harlem, white supremacists could reach anywhere they wanted. Parker wasn't your typical hood-wearing coward. He was educated, well-dressed, the kind of racist who wore suits instead of sheets but carried the same hatred in his heart. His father had been a judge in Alabama who'd helped orchestrate lynchings in the 1920s. His grandfather had ridden with Nathan Bedford Forrest. Hatred was the family business, and James Parker had inherited it, like other men inherit money. He'd moved to New York in 1956, started organizing Manhattan's KKK chapter, recruiting from police precincts, fire departments, and city government offices. By 1959, he had over 300 members, men with badges and authority who met in secret to plan ways to keep black people in their place. But Parker had made a crucial miscalculation. He thought because he wore expensive suits and had powerful friends, he could walk into Harlem and intimidate the queen of our community without consequences. I was across the room when it happened, talking to State Senator Robert Evans about legislation that would fund new schools in underserved neighborhoods. May was near the stage, discussing the evening's program with the band leader. Parker approached her from behind, moving through the crowd like he belonged there. He was tall, thin, with gray hair, and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo and a confidence that came from never facing consequences for his actions. When he put his hand on May's shoulder, she jumped. Not because she was startled, but because she recognized the touch immediately. The possessive grab, the territorial claim, the way men touch women when they want to remind them of their place in the world. May turned around, looked into Parker's face, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from physical danger, but the deeper fear that comes from knowing you are face to face with someone who sees you as less than human. "Excuse me," May said, her voice steady but cold. "Do I know you?" Parker's smile widened. "James Parker, ma'am. I've heard so much about you, Mrs. Johnson. They say you are quite influential in certain circles." The way he said certain circles made it clear he wasn't talking about charity work or education. He was talking about the fact that May was married to me, that her influence came from being the wife of Harlem's most powerful man. "I think you have me confused with someone else," May replied, stepping back, trying to create distance. But Parker stepped closer, invaded her space, made sure everyone nearby could see the interaction. "Oh, I don't think so," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "You are exactly who I came here to meet. You see, Mrs. Johnson, there are people in this city who think your husband has forgotten his place, who think maybe it is time someone reminded your family about the natural order of things." That is when he reached out and touched her shoulder again. This time it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, possessive, designed to humiliate and threaten. And that is when I moved. I've been in more fights than I can count. Street fights, gun battles, wars over territory that lasted for months. But I'd never felt rage like what filled me when I saw that white hand on my wife's shoulder, when I heard the way he spoke to her, when I realized he'd come to my community's most important event, specifically to disrespect the woman I loved. I crossed that ballroom in 8 steps. The crowd parted without thinking, people moving aside because they could see murder in my eyes, could feel the violence radiating from me like heat from a fire. Parker saw me coming. His smile faded, replaced by something that might have been fear if he'd been smart enough to be scared. Instead, he stood his ground, probably thinking his KKK membership and political connections would protect him. "Mr. Johnson," he said as I approached, "I was just introducing myself to your lovely wife." I stopped 2 feet from him, close enough to smell his expensive cologne, to see the sweat beginning to form on his forehead, to count the gold fillings in his teeth when he spoke. "Take your hand off my wife," I said quietly. The ballroom had gone completely silent. 200 people frozen, watching, waiting to see what would happen when unstoppable force met immovable object. Parker didn't remove his hand. If anything, he pressed it more firmly against May's shoulder, claiming ownership, asserting dominance. "Or what?" he asked. "You'll do something you'll regret." I looked at his hand on May's shoulder, looked at his smug face, looked around the room at all the witnesses, all the important people who would remember what happened next. "No," I said. "I'll do something you'll regret." Then I grabbed his wrist and twisted. The sound of James Parker's wrist breaking was like a gunshot in that silent ballroom, clean, sharp final. He screamed. A high-pitched sound that no man wants to make in front of 200 people, and dropped to his knees. But I wasn't finished. I knelt down next to him, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of that room. "James Parker," I said, "Grand Wizard of the Manhattan KKK. You came to my neighborhood, to my wife's charity event, to put your hands on my queen and threaten my family." Parker was cradling his broken wrist, tears streaming down his face, but I could see he was still defiant, still believed his connections would save him. "You don't understand," he gasped. "I have friends, important friends, police commissioners, judges, politicians. You can't just—" "You are right," I interrupted. "I can't just break your wrist and let you walk away. That would send the wrong message." I stood up, walked to the stage, picked up the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the frozen crowd, "I want you all to meet James Parker, Grand Wizard of the Manhattan KKK. He came to our charity event tonight to put his hands on my wife and tell us about the natural order of things." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people were horrified, others were angry, all of them were riveted. "Now Mr. Parker seems to think his connections will protect him from the consequences of disrespecting Mrs. Johnson," I continued. "So I want to make sure everyone in this room understands exactly what happened here tonight." I gestured to Parker, still kneeling on the floor, clutching his wrist. "This man came into our community, to our event, and put his hands on our queen. Not to shake hands, not to be polite, to claim ownership, to remind us of our place." I paused. Let that sink in. "But here's what Mr. Parker doesn't understand. In Harlem, we don't have a place. We are the place. And anyone who forgets that, anyone who thinks they can come into our neighborhood and put their hands on our women, learns very quickly that some mistakes can't be undone." I walked back to Parker, knelt down again. "You wanted to remind me about the natural order," I said quietly. "Let me remind you about mine. You leave Harlem tonight. You don't come back. You close down your Manhattan KKK chapter, and you disappear from New York forever. Because if I see you again, if I hear about you organizing meetings or recruiting members, or even thinking about my family, I won't just break your wrist." I leaned closer, made sure he could hear every word. "I'll break everything that matters to you. Your organization, your reputation, your ability to walk upright. Do you understand me, Grand Wizard?" Parker nodded quickly, desperately, the fight completely gone out of him. "Good," I said, standing up. "Now get out of my sight before I forget that I am at my wife's charity event." 2 men helped Parker to his feet and escorted him toward the exit. But before he reached the door, I called out one more time. Mr. Parker, you forgot something. He turned around, fear in his eyes. You owe my wife an apology. Parker looked at May, then at me, then at the 200 people watching his humiliation. I am sorry, Mrs. Johnson, he said, his voice barely audible. I was wrong to touch you. It won't happen again. No, May replied, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. It won't. Parker left the Audubon Ballroom at 9:15 p.m. with his wrist in a makeshift sling and his reputation in ruins. By morning, word of what had happened spread through both the black community and the white power structure. The Manhattan KKK chapter disbanded within a month. Parker moved to Florida, where he became a nobody working in his cousin's hardware store. The 300 members he'd recruited scattered like roaches when the lights came on, suddenly unwilling to associate with an organization whose leader had been humiliated by a black man in front of 200 witnesses. More importantly, the message was clear. Harlem was off limits. Our women were protected. Our community was sacred. And anyone who forgot those rules would answer to me personally. The fundraiser raised $50,000 that night, more than May had hoped for. Not because of my confrontation with Parker, but because of what it represented. The willingness to protect what matters, the courage to stand up to hatred, the understanding that respect isn't given. It is demanded and enforced. May never spoke publicly about what happened that night, but she never forgot it either. For the rest of our marriage, whenever she walked into a room, whenever she organized an event, whenever she represented our family in public, she did it with the confidence that comes from knowing your husband will break bones to protect your dignity. That is what love looks like in Harlem, not flowers and poetry, but the promise that anyone who disrespects your queen answers to your king. Not grand gestures, but the willingness to risk everything to defend what matters most. James Parker made the mistake of thinking he could intimidate Mayme Johnson because she was a black woman in 1959 America. What he didn't understand was that she wasn't just any black woman, she was my woman. And in Harlem, that made her untouchable. The natural order he talked about was simple. You respect our family, or you face the consequences. And on the 15th of June, 1959, 200 people watched James Parker learn that some lessons are taught with broken bones and public humiliation. They say love is patient and kind. Maybe that is true for other people. But in my world, love is protective and fierce. It is the willingness to break a man's wrist in front of 200 witnesses, because he forgot that queens demand respect. And if you ever touch my queen again, you'll learn that broken wrists are just the beginning of what happens when you mistake my patience for weakness.